Alright, we have made it to the last lab in Biology for Non-Majors 1. This lab is Lab 12, Organ Systems. This is going to be the last bit of material that's going to occur on your lab practical, which occurs next week, of course. The first part of this lab starts to talk about the 11 organ systems that make up the human body, and most animals' bodies for that matter. To start with, we have the circulatory system, which is also called the cardiovascular system. The heart is the major organ. You can see this heart pumping in this GIF up over here. You also have major vessels like the superior vena cava, the aorta, even smaller named vessels like the brachial artery, the femoral artery, things like that. Blood is actually a tissue, not an organ, but it's part of this system as well, and it's actually a very important part, so I didn't want to leave that out. The whole function of the circulatory system is to transport everything inside of your body, and when I say everything, I mean it. It transports hormones, it transports wastes, nutrients, respiratory gases. If it's something that needs to move in your body, the circulatory system is more than likely what's moving it. Next up, you have your respiratory system. Major organs are the lungs. If you look really closely where these are attaching to the apparatus, there's a tube that connects it to the apparatus. That's the trachea. It splits into the primary bronchi. Those are what I'm just calling the passageway for air. There's numerous tubes, and the tubes change names every time they split or pass under a major landmark. The whole function of this system is gas exchange. That means oxygen is going to get into your body, carbon dioxide is going to get out of your body. I do also want to mention, this GIF is actually running you through healthy lungs versus unhealthy lungs. These are the healthy lungs, these are the unhealthy lungs, and you can tell not just based on color, but as it runs through a few times, notice how much more expandable, or what's known as compliant, the healthy lungs are, versus when you see the unhealthy lungs, one of the lungs doesn't even expand like it's supposed to. There's more than likely a tumor that's occluding one of the passageways, and so essentially it shut down that whole lung. That's one of the reasons that you should try to avoid not just smoking, but vaping as well. Next, the digestive system breaks down nutrients, aka it digests. The nutrients have to be broken down into small enough molecules that they can pass through a plasma membrane. So basically this is the eating and then absorbing system. Major organs and things that belong in this, we've got salivary glands, the mouth, which leads to the pharynx, and then the esophagus. That leads to the stomach, which takes us to the small intestine. That leads to the large intestine, which is also known as the colon, and then that leads us out of the body. We do also have accessory structures like the liver and the pancreas that are very important parts of this system. It's just that the food never actually goes through those organs. Next, the urinary system is also called the excretory system. It removes nitrogenous waste. That essentially means urea and creatinine and uric acid, in other words, liquid waste from your system, and then gets it out of the body. So the major organs for that are the 2 kidneys, there's a right one and a left one, the 2 ureters, again there's a right and a left, 1 urinary bladder, and then 1 urethra that leads out of the body for human beings. Reproductive system is for reproductive purposes, and so baby making is how I said it on the slide, because apparently I wanted to be cute. For the female, the organs are the ovaries, the fimbriae, the fallopian tubes, aka oviducts or uterine tubes, the uterus, the vagina, the cervix is the very end of the uterus, the labia, the clitoris, those are the major organs. For the guys, we've got testes, epididymis, vas deferens or ductus deferens, seminal vesicles, prostate gland, and then of course the penis, which is in blue for the most part. Lymphatic system and the immune system are actually one organ system because the immune system doesn't have its own organs. That means the lymph system actually has 2 functions. It's got the immune function, and then it has the function of the actual lymphatic system, which is to return leaked fluid back to the circulatory system. Essentially, most of your capillaries are kind of leaky, and because they're leaky, a lot of the plasma leaks out of a blood vessel and it becomes interstitial fluid. That fluid still needs to be put back into circulation, otherwise you end up super swollen. It's called edema when that happens. The lymph system takes care of that fluid for you so you don't become super swollen. So you've got lymphatic vessels, which work a lot like veins from the circulatory system, but you also have several other organs. The thymus gland, which is located just above the heart, the spleen, which is kind of below and behind the stomach, the tonsils, which are around your oral cavity, and then lymph nodes, which are scattered everywhere. Integumentary system, this is your skin, your hair, and your nails, and its main function is protection, not just from pathogens, but also from water loss and chemical intrusion and a whole number of other things. Also, it protects you against UV rays. Skeletal system, this is bones and cartilage. It protects you, like you've got the skull around the brain, that's protecting the brain. It also does support major organs, like you have kind of a bowl-shaped They're called the os coxae. You guys would just call them hip bones, but that helps to keep all of your internal organs in, and so that's supporting those organs. Plus, most of your muscles attach to bones, so there's a movement functionality that goes along with the skeletal system as well. Even super bendy flexy people happen to have skeletal systems. Theirs is just extra super flexy bendy, but you can see the bones, they're very opaque when you look at them on an x-ray, and so you can see all the bones of the vertebral column, including the sacrum and the coccyx. This person has the legs actually up straight versus she doesn't, but whatever. She's basically trying to mimic what's going on over there. Muscular system. This is your skeletal muscle. Now the lab manual does say that cardiac muscle and smooth muscle are in this system. I tend to consider those types of muscle part of the system they belong in, like cardiac muscle is part of the circulatory system, and smooth muscle is part of whatever system it's in, like the respiratory system or the digestive system. So I tend to make this one just about skeletal muscle. Even if you're going to go ahead and incorporate all three types of muscle into this, they all do the same thing. They move stuff. It's just that skeletal muscle moves you versus the other two move things inside of you, like cardiac muscle moves blood inside of you, and smooth muscle in your digestive system moves food inside of you. The nervous system. This is your brain, spinal cord, and nerves that come off of there. It controls everything, and it controls those things very quickly. I kind of thought this was like one of those games, like Surgery Simulator or something, but now I'm trying, like after I've watched it a few times, I wonder if this is a real surgery. If it is a game, they rendered it very well. Because you can even see there's bone, there's dermis, there's epidermis, there will be hair, there's an ear going on up over here, and they're fixing this bleed. But this is the brain going on right there. P.S. I guess gross picture if you want to see it that way. I'm fascinated by it. It's a beautiful, mushy, goopy little thing that makes you who you are. It's so bizarre that this pile of jello is responsible for storing every memory you've ever had. Endocrine system is the most often overlooked organ system, and I think it's because high schools don't cover this system very well. Most of the things that end in gland in your body, they're part of this system. So pituitary gland, thyroid gland, adrenal glands, those are all the major ones that are in there. There's also other structures that can make hormones, like the ovaries and the testes, that are also part of this system. That is a good time for me to mention there are lots of organs that don't just belong in one organ system, they actually belong in a couple. For example, your ovaries or testes, depending on which ones you have, they do make hormones. The ovaries make estrogen and progesterone, the testes make testosterone, so they're part of the endocrine system, but they also make the gametes, which means they're also part of the reproductive system. Pancreas is another good example. It's part of the endocrine system because it makes insulin and glucagon, but it also makes digestive enzymes, so it's also part of the digestive system. So there's a lot of overlap in organs sometimes. Okay. After that, there's a list of organs that you're supposed, organ systems that you're supposed to provide the function for, and we just did that. So just go back and rewatch that if you need to. Your lab manual also covers that. We're going to go ahead and move to this next part where it says state the organ system that this organ belongs to. So the heart is part of the circulatory or cardiovascular, whichever one of those you want to say. So the heart is located right here between the two lungs. It is above a sheet of muscle called the diaphragm, so your heart sits right on top of the diaphragm. Next, uterus, only present in females. Uterus is part of the reproductive system. This is the organ that once a month makes every woman's life a living hell because it rips off part of its lining and makes you bleed and ruin sheets or, whatever you do. And then this is also the organ that can help an embryo grow into a fetus and then push with the force of 1,000 suns so that the baby will leave you when it's time for the baby to leave you. The brain, showed you one of these nice and close up earlier. It's part of the nervous system. Lung is part of the respiratory system. The bones, like you can see some ribs in this picture, they're part of the skeletal system. Now, the lab manual just says bladder. You've got a gallbladder and you have a urinary bladder, so I wanted to be more specific because they're in different organ systems. The urinary bladder is part of the urinary or excretory system. Gallbladder, on the other hand, is part of the digestive system. So this is the urinary bladder. This happens to be the location for a female. The bladder sits right on top. The uterus sits right on top of the bladder. Guys don't have that organ. They just have a bigger urinary bladder, so they don't have to pee as often as ladies do. Liver and the stomach are both part of the digestive system. Spinal cord, I wanted to show you guys this one up close and personal, so we're watching surgery on a person's spinal cord. All of this white that has the blood vessels on the surface, this is all the spinal cord. These are spinal nerves that are actually emerging from the spinal cord. Those are going to end up connecting. I can't tell where they are in this person's body based on the landmarks, and so if this is towards the upper body, this might go to an arm, a forearm, that sort of a thing, but these are going to be what help to innervate, and they're actually part of this system too, but it asks for spinal cord as part of the nervous system. Next. Small intestine's part of the digestive system. It does have 3 little chunks to it, the duodenum, the jejunum, and the ileum. I don't think you guys need to know that since you're just non-majors, but all of this jazzy tube stuff in here, that's all the small intestine. Kidneys, most people have a right one and a left one. They are part of the urinary system. The nerves, I kind of alluded to these when we were looking at that spinal cord picture earlier, but all of these little fibers that are extending from both the brain and the spinal cord, they're nerves. You either have cranial nerves or you have spinal nerves. They're part of the nervous system. The mouth, this is one of those organs that belongs to multiple organ systems. It's part of the digestive system, so you know you put food in there and you start the process of processing said food, so you start chewing on it, you mix it with saliva, which has some enzymes on it. But if you get a stuffy nose and you have trouble breathing through your nose, you can also breathe through your mouth, so it's also part of the respiratory system, although your respiratory system would prefer that you use the nose if at all possible, so it belongs to a couple. Incidentally, this person's tonsils are fairly enlarged and sticking out. These are what are known as the palatine tonsils, and so probably they went in complaining about a sore throat because those tonsils are so very large. Alright, after that they give you this picture and they tell you to do various things with the labels that are going on there. So it starts with just identify the organ labeled A, that's the brain. What organ system is B in? Well, this one's sort of iffy for me because I'm not sure if they're trying to point at the skin, which is part of the integumentary system, or more likely they meant to point to the nose here, and the nose is part of the respiratory system. So I would say respiratory system because they probably meant nose. Alright, then we're going to do all the other identifies together. Identify C, this is the thyroid gland. It happens to be part of the endocrine system. E is pointing to a lung, which is part of the respiratory system. G is pointing at the liver, which is part of the digestive system. And then I is the small intestine, part of the digestive system. Next, what organ system for D? So this is pointing at the superior vena cava, actually the place where those two merge together to create the superior vena cava. That's part of the circulatory system. F is pointing at the heart, so that's the circulatory system. H is pointing at the large intestine or the colon. That's part of the digestive system. At this point, you should be ready for the post lab, so make sure you take the quiz in Blackboard.